nucleus. Hi and welcome to this video on the circulatory system. It is made up of the blood, the heart itself and the blood vessels, and this video will look at each of those in turn. Starting with the components of the blood, we have red blood cells whose job is to carry oxygen around the body, white blood cells that help to defend against disease. They do this by ingesting the pathogen or producing antitoxins to fight or counteract the poisons that some bacteria release, and some actually produce antibodies which help us develop immunity to pathogens. You also have platelets, which are involved in helping the blood to clot at the site of a wound. And all of these components float around or are carried by the blood plasma. The plasma carries waste products such as urea, all the blood cells, carries hormones, waste carbon dioxide from cells to the lungs, amino acids and glucose from the digestive tract to all the cells that need them. It's important to link the structure of these components to their job. So in order to carry more oxygen, a red blood cell actually, strangely, would lack the nucleus that most cells have. This gives a lot more space for oxygen. Its shape is really important. It has what's known as a biconcave disc shape. So two sides of this spherical cell have been squished inwards at little caves. And this actually gives a shape that has a much larger surface area, again to enable more oxygen to be carried. The oxygen actually sticks to a molecule called hemoglobin, which is a red pigment, and gives the cells their colour. This pigment, when it combines with oxygen, forms a compound called oxyhemoglobin, which is bright red in colour, which is the colour of oxygenated blood. And when this blood gets to cells that have a lack of oxygen because they've been using the oxygen in respiration, the oxyhemoglobin dissociates, breaking down into hemoglobin again and releasing oxygen, which then diffuses into the cells. This leaves the blood deoxygenated, and contrary to the popular misconception, deoxygenated blood is not blue. In fact, it's just a dull red, almost a brown red in colour. White blood cells, on the other hand, do have a nucleus. Platelets are just cell fragments, and blood plasma is a liquid that has a pale straw-like colour. Now let's move on to the heart itself. So on the surface of this heart you can see some vessels, and the vessels that deliver the oxygenated blood to the heart muscle cells to enable them to contract are called coronary arteries. So vessels that are associated with the heart are called coronary, but arteries are delivering the oxygenated blood to the heart cells. Let's open up the heart now and look at the structure of it internally and how it relates to the circulatory system. Now, human circulatory system is a double circulatory system, which means it does a figure of 8. The blood actually goes through the heart twice on one circumnavigation of the body. It has to visit both the lungs and all the body cells via a capillary bed. You're very likely to have to label a diagram of the heart, and your first step in getting this right is to get the left and the right hand side of the heart right. And you've got to imagine that the heart diagram that you have in your exam paper is of the heart of a person that stood opposite you. So it is their left and not your left. That would be on this side. Making this side, the right hand side of the heart, is complete opposite to you. And there are two chambers on the left and the right hand side. The uppermost chamber is the atria or atrium, and the lower chamber is called the ventricle. Veins are blood vessels that bring blood into the heart through the atrium. We'll start talking about the blood entering the heart from the rest of the body through the right atrium, and the vein that it goes through is the vena cava. This is the main vein from the body. As this body, it has lost its oxygen and is therefore deoxygenated. It is not blue in colour, it is a dull red colour, but that doesn't look very good in a textbook. So it's blue here for purpose of simplicity. The right atrium fills with this deoxygenated blood and gives a little squeeze, and that blood then moves from the right atrium down into the right ventricle. And what separates the atrium and the ventricle here is a valve, and valves are there to prevent the blood flowing in the opposite direction or the wrong direction. So the right ventricle has now filled with this blood. The right ventricle has a little squeeze controlled by the heartbeat, and it pushes the blood up and out of the right-hand side of the heart. Now, the blood vessel that takes blood away from the heart is called an artery. So remember that A for artery, A for away. And this blood being deoxygenated needs to go to the lungs to pick up that oxygen. And any vessel that is taking blood away, deoxygenated needs to go to the lungs to pick up that oxygen. And any vessel that is associated with the lungs is called a pulmonary vessel. So the vessel that is taking blood away from the heart to the lungs is called a pulmonary artery. So this blood, on visiting alveoli, so it's running through a capillary now, the narrowest blood vessel, that only allows one red blood cell through at a time. Each of those red blood cells should pick up a full set of oxygen and become oxygenated. So this oxygenated blood now flows back into the heart on the left-hand side. So it's going into the heart through a vein that's coming from the lungs, so it's going to be a pulmonary vein, and it flows into the heart through the atrium on the left-hand side. So this atrium fills with blood, has a little squeeze, pushes that blood down into the left ventricle. And you can see that the wall of the left ventricle, and this is a muscular wall, is much thicker than the muscular wall on the right-hand side. And this is because the left side of the heart has to contract with a lot more power because the blood from this ventricle has to go around to the rest of the body. The right-hand side literally only has to pump the blood to the lungs, which are left and right of the heart itself, whereas the left-hand side of the heart has to pump that blood all the way to your big toe and back. To do that, that muscle is a lot thicker. So once the ventricle has had its little squeeze, it's going to push that oxygenated blood out of the heart, so away from the heart, in an artery which is the biggest artery, and this is called the aorta. And the aorta in the biggest mammal, which is a blue whale, is actually large enough for a small child to crawl through. To scale it down to humans, it is the biggest artery and the biggest blood vessel. So this oxygenated blood is being pumped all the way to the rest of the body, and the oxygen is delivered to the cells through the narrowest blood vessel, which is a capillary, and you'll find these embedded through collections of cells, and this site is called a capillary bed. So these are spread out everywhere in the body. That blood has now given up its oxygen, picked up loads of waste materials like carbon dioxide, and is en route back to the heart via the vena cava again, where it re-enters the heart through the right atrium, and the whole cycle begins again. So you need to be pretty savvy in the differences between arteries, veins, and capillaries, and you may be asked to compare these. So when you're asked in an exam to compare, you need to talk about both the similarities and the differences. As you can see in this diagram here, the arteries and veins look quite similar in the sense that they both have a lumen, which is just a central part of that vessel where blood is actually flowing through, and the lumen is flanked or surrounded by these layers of elastic fibres and smooth muscle. The differences between the arteries and veins is the relative sizes of the lumen and the muscle and elastic fibres. So the lumen of the arteries is quite narrow. This keeps the pressure in the arteries at quite a high level, which is necessary to get the blood everywhere in the body. To withstand that pressure, you have these really, really thick layers of muscle and elastic fibres. Veins don't have blood at such high pressures, so the actual wall of the vein with the elastic and the muscle much thinner, and the lumen is much wider. Because pressure isn't sustained in the veins, there is a risk of blood falling backwards, especially through the legs, because for blood to get from your feet all the way back up to your heart, the heart has to push against gravity, and it's quite hard work. So to prevent that hard work being undone by blood falling backwards, the veins have loads of valves, like the heart does, to prevent that blood flowing backwards. So blood is supposed to go up through these open valves, and if for whatever reason it tries to come back down again, the valves will close and prevent the blood going back down to your feet. To help this process a little bit, these veins actually go through pairs of muscles. So these muscles here are representing maybe your calf muscles. So every time you're moving, even the subtlest of movements are effectively squeezing the blood vessel, the vein, like a tube of toothpaste, and helping the blood flow back up to the heart. If you are going to be stationary for a long period of time, so you might be on a long haul flight, or you might be having surgery in a hospital and have to recover, you'll be given flight socks, which basically do the work of the leg muscles by squeezing in and putting pressure on the sides of the veins. As you can see in this diagram, the relative sizes of the arteries being much bigger than the veins, but the capillaries are tiny in comparison. We actually had to zoom in on a capillary, but you should see that there's no elastic fibres, there's no smooth muscle, it's just a wall made up of cells, and that thickness of cells is 1 cell thick. This is important because capillaries are there to enable gas exchange. So you find capillaries in the lungs, so the blood can become oxygenated and give up its waste. You also find capillaries in those capillary beds I mentioned before to deliver the oxygen and the glucose from the blood to all of those cells. So it's important that the items that need to be exchanged from the blood to the cells and vice versa don't have to travel through a massive layer of cells. So capillaries are 1 cell thick, and they are so narrow that they only allow 1 red blood cell through at a time, and this enables the red blood cell to fully pick up all the oxygen it can do and fully get rid of all the oxygen it needs to get rid of. So that covers the circulatory system. My advice to you is get lots of printouts of the diagram of the heart and just keep on practicing labelling it. And if you can do a dissection, it is brilliant. You do get